Welcome to the Minnesota Liberty Network, and here are your hosts, Bill Liskey and Drew Roach.
Welcome back, Drew.
Welcome back. I'm back.
You're back.
I'm back.
It's good to have you back.
It feels like it's been a while.
Well, it's been a month for you.
Been a month, yeah. Well, busy.
And Drew, I did miss you, by the way.
Missed you too, Matty V.
Thank you.
I mean, I don't know if I missed you, but I'm glad to have you back.
I see you all the time.
We talk a lot. So, what do you think? What do you think today, Drew? Feeling good about stuff at the Capitol, or?
I mean, as good as we can. I mean,
Sure.
Got to negotiate with terrorists, so that makes it challenging.
Well, let's start with talking about the positives. I get to talk a little bit about a positive that happened. It took a lot of time coming. This is the third session that I've been working on this. So we're working on cottage foods, and I've got positive news for those people out there that are interested in cottage foods, including my wife, who is just at home baking sourdough bread right now. So
Yeah, I love sourdough.
I am as well.
yeah,
Interested to hear what you have to say.
so cottage foods. We were battling it out with Minnesota Department of Agriculture and with those the cottage foods industry as a whole. I've been on the side of the cottage foods industry for the last 3 years and working really hard trying to get their bill to go through. So not only increase the amount of money they can earn, but also be able to ship them and also be able to protect themselves under a limited liability company, LLCs. On the 11th hour, we finally got it. We finally got it passed. So what happened is Thursday let's just rewind just a little bit. Sunday I was emailed by one of the deputy commissioners asking how the amendment was going. And the amendment they had sent me was not agreeable. It was just too much. There was things in there that I didn't agree to, that I never wanted. And then, so I responded, unfortunately, this amendment's just not workable the way it is. And their response was, well, can we meet? And I said, sure. So we get Jennifer Caravo, who is she's the vice president of the Cottage Foods group. And she came to the Capitol and met with us. And it was just myself, Deputy Commissioner Vobble, and Jennifer. And we hammered it out on Thursday. And it passed Friday morning it was an amendment that was added into the Ag Omnibus Bill, and it passed off to the floor. So we are actually on to finance because, of course, it's got to stop there first. But so we successfully have a bill that now is going to possibly allow shipping and allow you to properly protect your company.
That's good. That's awesome. Yeah, I look forward to moving that along on the House side. Obviously, time-wise, it's not going to happen this session, but the companion in the House or in the Senate is off to a good start. So I look forward to making that a top priority in next year.
The cool thing is that because it's in our Ag Omnibus Bill, you guys could conference committee that and you could take it in and accept it without having to pass it through your House, which is nice. So you'll be the chief author of a bill that hopefully gets passed that you never even had to go and present to.
We'll see. I'm sure that'll be an option.
I'm
not going to hold my
We're
breath,
not holding our breath
but
because
you never
conference
know.
committees are dangerous business.
Yep.
But we can only hope. So there's a couple other bills that you brought to me this last week. Why don't we talk about those?
Yep. One's an elections bill for provisional ballots, which is we desperately need in the state. Obviously, with the elections that we have here, one of the handful of states that do not have provisional ballots, which would be a huge win for Minnesotans and voters in the state. Brought you that one. And then, we took a trip to Tennessee earlier in the year, you, myself, and Senator Wiesenberg. We did some strolling around downtown Tennessee, and one of the places that we stopped at was a cigar bar.
Yeah, it was actually pretty cool.
Yeah,
I don't smoke, so for me it's not a big deal, and I don't drink, so that's also not really that big a deal. But it was fun to hang out.
Yeah, and it's not one of my top priorities either, but it was just kind of nice. When
The thing I liked about it was the social environment.
Yeah,
we met some really cool dudes there.
And what we need to be doing is trying to be smart and create as much revenue opportunity and business opportunities that we can for people in Minnesota. We're getting more and more businesses that are leaving the state, more and more people that our top earners in the state moving out of state, whether it be South Dakota, Wisconsin, Iowa, North Dakota. So we need to be able to be a very, promote business and promote new ideas. And if this is just one thing that will help promote a different idea. Currently in Minnesota, if you have a sample license in like a tobacco shop, there's certain cigar places right now that allow you to sample cigars and smoke them in the facility. All
Sure.
this does is extend that and allow them to create an environment where they could sell alcohol as well. Right.
I'm absolutely certain this is a good bill.
So-
Expanding your freedom to do what you should or want to do with your business. It's a great idea.
Yeah. So
And the provisional ballots thing, love it. I think we would have a lot different results out of Shakopee if provisional ballots had been in place.
yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, and really just Dakota County in general.
Dakota County, Scott County, whichever.
I mean,
all of
on
the
top of fixing the voter rolls, which needs to be a top priority. And I know in elections, as a committee, we're going to be using that as a leverage point to be able to release any funding to the Secretary of State that, hey, per the federal government's requirements, because
Right.
there's HAVA money that they're looking to get their hands on. And when I say they, I mean the Secretary of State. And in order for the federal government to give them the $1 million, they need to do some certain things with the
With
voter
securing
rolls.
elections. Yeah.
With the voter
absolutely.
rolls.
Yep.
And the state elections committee, we give them 200,000, and we're just gonna, potentially not give up that money until they do what they need to do. And so
Absolutely.
Secretary of State's got a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. And there's one more thing going on here on these bills that you've been working on, and you and I are both authors. You're the chief author in the House, I think. I'm a co-author in the Senate with Senator Wiesenberg, but I think you got to see him yesterday.
I did. Yep.
What was going on yesterday?
Well, so as everyone's aware, we saw rallies across the state and across the country with these, people that are being bussed in, and how are all of a sudden all these protesters out there? And I'm not talking about the hands-off protest. I mean, that's the
No,
one that
That was the
everybody
big one, and we'll
that
talk
was-
about that later.
But I was actually at the Capitol for another reason, which is, I'm the chief author of House File 1782, which is the Defend the Guard bill, which unfortunately is a bill that we shouldn't even need to have written, because the U.S. Constitution already, lays out the fact that we shouldn't need this bill. And essentially, what the Defend the Guard does is reiterate what's already in the Constitution, that in order to deploy the National Guard, we need to have an act. Congress needs to declare an act of war.
Right.
And so I was, asked to speak at the Defend the Guard rally at the Capitol yesterday, which I was excited to do, and I did. Senator Wiesenberg is the chief author of that bill in the Senate, and so it was nice. Met with a bunch of other liberty-minded people and trying to get the word out about the Defend the Guard bill. I think, again, that's it's a high importance. I think everybody across the state and across the country is sick and tired of seeing America be in wars that we don't belong in. And so this would just kind of reiterate it and specifically protect the Minnesota National Guard men and women who serve from being able to be deployed overseas without having an act of war. And so it's a no-brainer to me. It's unfortunate that this bill even has to be brought forward based on the fact that we haven't had a declaration of war called by Congress since World War II.
Right.
And it's sad, but I think majority of people support this across the state on both sides of the aisle. It is a bipartisan effort, and so I'm humbled and honored to be the chief author of that in the House. And we're going to continue to grow the movement and talk to people and reach people on both sides of the aisle to educate them on why it's important. And I look forward to that being a top priority in the next legislative year.
Yeah. I think the one thing that I always say with the Defend the Guard is that's most important to me. First of all, wars are expensive, costs a lot of taxpayer dollars. But the thing that's most important to me is that people lose their lives. We lose our family members, whether they're brothers, sisters, moms, aunts, uncles, dads, whatever. We should not be losing soldiers in forever wars. Like, it just should not be happening. So that's my perspective.
Well, on top of that, I mean, listen, I remember, and I stated this, yesterday when I was speaking. I think majority of us our age remember where we were on 9/11 when that when 9/11 happened. Um, and after that, let's just be honest, we were fed a bunch of lies and propaganda about why we were involved in that and why we ended up, fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan because of that. And a lot of it turned out to be um, not true and
Well,
propaganda.
and that's the worst part is that we didn't know what was true and what wasn't because we were just getting told
Yeah.
information. And I think that's kind of where we're at today too, is that unfortunately a lot of times we fall into this realm of we listen to what we're told and we don't critically think. And
Correct.
I'm getting really frustrated with the fact that people aren't willing to critically think. Critical thinking is by far the most important part of our day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, so with that, we were sold a bill of lies and used as pawns to push a narrative that in a lot of ways was not true or um, you know stretching of the truth. And the reality is post 9/11 we have things now that have taken away our civil liberties like the TSA, where you have to go through, before you get on a plane, you got to go through security and take off your belt, take off your shoes, go through machines. They want to scan your eyes. I mean, all this, in my opinion, just complete stripping of your civil liberties in the pursuit of being safe. And,
and I think
that's not right. And then on top of that, we've got things like the FISA Accord, which is now used against Americans to name Americans or title them or call them as domestic terrorists whenever said agency wants to investigate or look into or check the background or whatever to parents that want to go to the school board and
Right.
speak on their on behalf of their children. So a lot of things that have happened because of war, because of just America in general wanting to push their will. And I mean, in some cases, yes, we need to go overseas and fight and do what we need to do to, help people. But in a lot of cases, the military industrial complex has not had our best interest at heart. And we just need to, as Americans need to start coming together and realizing that war is destructive on many fronts. It kills millions of people and destroys families, and we just need to, at the end of the day, we need to, get away from that.
Well, and I think the most important thing for me is every time you're willing to give up a liberty for safety, that means you're willing to give up both. Never will you get more safety by giving up your freedom.
Correct.
It never equates to that. And so that's something that's super important.
Yeah.
The other part about the Capitol that is most draining, and I think you've probably started to learn this now that you've been there for this whole part of this session. Now we're getting into committee deadlines. We're Friday. That was first and second deadlines.
Yep.
Third deadline's this Friday coming up. And you're learning what those mean. It means we get quite the sludge, quite the grind, especially towards the end of the schedule. I think we heard, trying to remember, I think we're at 47 bills in Health and Human Services just this last week.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of bills to hear. And we don't get a lot of time to debate them, unfortunately, because they're cramming them all in, trying to get them done. That's another bill that I actually got to present. I got to present the chiropractic bill and talk about the importance of chiropractic and the healthcare system as a whole. Conservative approaches, non-pharmacological approaches are very important because it saves a ton of money. If we didn't have chiropractic services offered via the insurance realm, then we would not be able to help people with spinal complaints that normally would go to the ER if they didn't go to the chiropractor. So super important stuff, but that's the health and human services world that we're living in. It's a constant barrage of bills, and it is the biggest. Again, I always stress health and human services is the biggest cost to the budget.
Well, and then we get into the point where we're talking about the end of committee and committee deadlines, and what happens at the end of committees is where we put together these
Massive omnibus bills.
These omnibus bills, which some would articulate that are not constitutional, and others would say that they are. It's depending on how you look at it. Now, based on language within the legislature, they say that it's within the Constitution, right?
Yeah,
because it's what they define as single subject law. items.
Yeah, I'll argue from both perspectives. I can't stand omnibus bills. I generally vote against them because there's so much junk that gets stuffed into them. If we stuck to the omnibus bills now, see, I'm not going to talk for all omnibus bills. I'm going to be very specific. If we stuck to omnibus bills strictly within the jurisdiction of each committee, I could argue or can understand the argument. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I could understand the argument of it being single subject because now you're sticking to the committee's jurisdiction. That's it. It's the only thing that bill's doing. But that's not what happened last year. Last year, we passed a taxes bill that literally contained a whole bunch of junk from all of the committees, and it was one bill. And it was, 14, almost 1,500 pages. It was a pile of junk. So there is place for omnibus bills in the aspect of it makes the language easier. It keeps it all organized, uniform. Personally, I think you should be able to, pull in, put out stuff in there that you don't like. You should be. I personally want to be able to vote on every item.
Yeah.
Because there are items that I think that we should have, and people are going to, judge me for that, and that's fine. But I also think there's items in there that we absolutely shouldn't have, and unfortunately, they get stuck together. So at the end of the day, if there's one bad item in that omnibus bill, I generally vote against it.
Correct. And I agree with that. And it's in some case, actually in like most of the cases, is every one of those in committee where you have these omnibus bills that were put together. Those were all individual bills that were heard.
Yep.
And laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill. Meaning they typically, when they were heard on an individual basis, either they were heard in committee just to throw a member a bone,
right,
or they were heard in committee because and then didn't get a vote on it because they didn't have the votes to get through. So they lay it over so they can use that specific bill to negotiate with another bill to put them together, right?
It's just the nonstop negotiating.
I'll give you this if you give me that. And, for me, I can see it. I can understand why, but and I don't go against the omnibus bills to be this pain in the ass.
Well, neither do I.
But the reality is I didn't come in, I didn't decide to run and be a, state representative to continue to go along with the status quo.
Right.
I came in to change the status quo. And so, there might be people that say, gosh, he won't work with anybody or he's divisive. And the reality is
you're not. You're just sticking to your guns.
Being very principled and trying to be as consistent as I can, because if we're never going to, how do we ever change anything if we don't stick to our principles and show other members that you can do the same thing too.
Okay.
It's okay. I'm not attacking anybody. I'm not going after anybody, but I have to believe in what I believe in first. And there is a lot of pressure both in committees and in the caucus to do what everybody else does. And it's problematic because if we're going to sit here and point fingers at the Democrats and say, man, none of them are, the difference between Republicans and Democrats, or Republicans are free thinkers and we think independently.
Yep.
But then at the same time, putting this pressure on Republicans as individuals to vote exactly like the whole body. Right. Well, how are we any different than the Democrats?
No, and see, that's the thing that bothers me about omnibus bills as a whole, is it brings in the idea and the ideology of groupthink. Yeah. I think this part of this bill is great, so I'm going to think the whole bill's great. Well, no, we know you don't think that. We know you don't like my bill that got stuck in there. So why are you voting for the omnibus bill if you don't like my bill?
Yeah.
I would rather have, I think this is a process thing, and maybe it's something that as a caucus and as a Republican Party we should talk about, is if a bill is going to be laid over for possible inclusion, we should have to vote on it still.
Yeah.
I think we should know how most of the members on that committee sit so we know where it's at.
Yeah.
Because I personally think we should vote on it, at least at some point, have a vote on it. Because there's things where I'm like, I would never vote for that.
Yeah.
But yet we're going to lay it over for possible inclusion. And as soon as it gets thrown in there, I'm never going to vote for that omnibus bill.
I don't know how they do it in the Senate, but I know in the House, so we typically know how a member is going to vote because we have text threads,
right?
And we're talking with each other.
Oh, always.
And so we kind of know, hey, we're going to lay this one over because so and so is having trouble passing it.
But from my perspective, okay, if they're having a hard time passing it, why are we even including it in a possibility?
Correct. Then
I would
then
rather
what-
have the vote on the committee and say, hey, so-and-so on the committee doesn't like this bill. Perfect, but who knows? Maybe the Democrats do.
correct.
You don't know. And so if everybody were to take a vote, no matter whether they're for it or against it or whatever, there should be a discussion of a vote, whether it's yay or nay to be included as a possible inclusion.
Yeah, I agree. So, and again, that's the state of the state right now in committee, and that's where you use the term sludge.
Yeah, and
It
that's
is-
the sludge.
It is a lot of sludge.
And see, now you're understanding my sludge title.
Yeah, no, I like it.
it's
It's
a committee
true.
sludge.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moving parts that just no one understands the behind the scenes stuff until we sit down and explain it like this.
Yeah.
And so labor, even more drastic. If you want to talk about real sludge, that's a real sludge committee. She refuses to hear anything with Republican ideas. So we just cancel committees in the Senate when we don't have bills that we want to hear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we're, in elections, in education, we're, right now trying to negotiate with the Democrats in election. So, not election.
In education policy. Yep.
Education policy. Our committees are done. We've done what we need to do as far as bills. And we put together like a plan of how we're going to go ahead and start negotiating with the Democrats. And I'm not going to get into specifics, but essentially it doesn't seem like we're being able to be super productive
Right.
on that end. And so what voters need to understand is the Republicans are working very hard to be able to, because we don't have the votes to repeal the mandates, and we know that voters don't want increased revenue. They don't want
Right.
to have their taxes increase where we have to provide more revenue to pay for these mandates. The only other option we have is to negotiate on what
You got to take little pieces, little bites of the apple.
correct on
Yep.
what single line items are important and how do we reallocate the money. And
that's what's happening in the Senate too.
Andrew Myers brought a bill forward, and I actually did a poll on Facebook in the community page about this. And Andrew Myers brought a bill in education finance that essentially said that if you're as a family make more than $150,000, which is 3 times the poverty level,
Yep.
that you would be required or could have the option to pay for school lunch,
Right.
which would free up $85 million a year that
For
was
those
currently
schools to-
for those schools that was
Yep.
currently being funded for the free lunch now keep in mind all students in Minnesota, regardless of parents' income, get free breakfast and free lunch.
Yep.
So all this would do is they would still get the free breakfast.
Yep.
It just allows parents the option that make over $150,000 to pay for their own school lunch, which would free up $85 million a year or
For the schools.
$175 million for the biennium to take that money and reallocate it in a different expenditure,
Yep.
specifically the LOR, which is the local operational revenue,
Yep.
optional revenue, which would allow schools to
To put it where
spend
they
that
need it.
money wherever they need it.
Right.
Right.
You know, like,
And the Democrats destroyed it and voted it down. Education Minnesota was there.
see, that's crazy to me.
Was Education Minnesota, the teachers union, totally came in there and shot it down. Minnesota
But just-
Department of Education came in there and shut it down.
Well, here's the thing that it doesn't make any sense. Ed Minnesota makes 0 sense to me. This would have been good for the teachers, and here's why. So we take that 86 million, 85 million, whatever a year, and instead of putting it towards school lunches, or in this case, the other thing that I've heard is that some of that money actually goes to school lunch equipment, not just school lunches. And so actually that money gets tied up in equipment. Well, if you don't need new equipment every year, which you don't, right? Like some of the equipment can last for a lot more than a year. Matt knows, he's worked in a kitchen. This stuff can last a lot longer than a year. They have to just sit on that money because it can't be used anywhere else. So if we opened that up, we changed how that worked, that money could go directly to teachers' pensions, directly to teachers' salaries, however you want to describe it. Time
Well,
off,
so
give them
you-
more time off.
And so in our district in Farmington, one of the things in Tim Walz's budget was he cut Q comp pay, which is what
Right.
teachers, which is some school districts the teachers get paid with Q comp, right?
Yep.
And anyways, Walz cut some of that funding. Well, this essentially would free up that money to go back into the Q comp expenditure, and they voted it down. There was an amendment brought forward on this specific bill that would allow that money to go right into teachers' pensions,
Right.
and they voted it down.
See, that's
right?
just That just doesn't make any sense to me. You know, whenever we hear about Ed Minnesota being at the Capitol, and I hear Ed Minnesota, and I immediately know that it's supposed to be the teachers union.
Yeah.
Supposed to be. The reason I say supposed to be is because the reality is every time I hear from one of their members, it's nothing about teachers. It's all about weird policy stuff that generally I could never agree with. It's just very strange. I don't understand why they're not up there fighting for teachers.
Well, and that's the thing is what we really need right now is those superintendents, teachers, school board members, which I know there's a lot. They need to be more vocal about this.
Absolutely.
They really need to step up and start educating their teachers, being more vocal about what we're trying to do on the Republican side to help them.
Yep.
But we can't help them if they can't help themselves, right? And that's where we're at. And I know there were some school board members and superintendents that didn't like the mandates, but instead of talking and pushing back against the mandates, we're trying to find how we made more revenue by actually having levies. And the voters in our district said no. Right. We, the city, the folks of Farmington, for the last 2 election cycles have voted down levies.
Absolutely. And how are they going to be able to afford it if we keep voting down levies?
And unfortunately, because Democrats don't want to negotiate and they won't allow us to repeal, we're looking to repeal unemployment insurance,
right?
Which is, you know, it's a problem. I mean, there's $76 million sitting in funds right now for unemployment insurance for schools that we could free that money up if we repealed that. Plus the $33 million that's going to go in there this year to help fund it for future years. That's $100 million right there that we can use at our disposal in other areas for QComp, for the READ Act, for teacher pensions. And
Absolutely.
Democrats are saying no.
Right, which is just crazy to me. So let's move on to that next segment that we've got going on. We call it the floor war is what I'm going to call it. Constant battle of political theatrics is what I like to call it. This is where all the theater happens.
Yeah, I wish I'd have taken drama class in school. I'd probably be a little bit more prepared.
I'd be a lot better at it if I would have taken more drama classes. So how's your floor? Let's talk about your floor first, and then we'll talk about mine.
Well, the last couple of weeks, floor has been pretty mundane.
Yeah,
I think we're right now. They're, you know, when we do have we have 3 sessions a week. Usually 2 of those are paper pushes. So for those that aren't aware. They're literally bills that are just there to be heard for their first and second reading. And that's pretty much it. We sit down, the clerk does his thing. You'll sit here and hear the speaker, second reading, boom, second reading, boom, second reading, and then we're done. Then we adjourn, and we, schedule the next session date. And then we have 1 floor session a week that's got 5-6 bills, and they're pretty bipartisan.
Sure.
And they almost always pass. So that's kind of the state of the state. Not a whole lot of theatrics going on right now. A lot of that theatrics is going on in committee where we're, in the sludge.
Yep.
And so that's kind of, as far as in the House, not a whole lot going on, but that's going to ramp up here. We got 1 more week, and then we're off for Easter break.
Right.
And then coming back, that's when the theater really
starts, when the floor
right?
theater
That's when Broadway
will
comes.
actually get going. Yeah.
So maybe not Broadway. I think they sing on Broadway, but
So I'm going to stress one more important part about the floor that you forgot about paper push days. Yeah. This is the most important part about paper push that you probably didn't realize, or it's just you haven't heard about it or dealt with it yet. In the Senate, the most important thing about paper push day is to have the first and second readings, but the other important thing is it allows them to transfer one bill from one committee to the next.
Yes.
So that's the other really important part about paper push.
That is true.
Because every committee report has to be approved by the floor in order for it to go to the next committee.
Yes.
So that's why we, for the next 2 weeks, are going to have, for last week and this week, we're going to have 3 floor sessions. Normally in the Senate, we only have 2. We have Monday and Thursday. And soon it'll actually just turn into all floor sessions because that's when we debate every single bill and we just sit there and turn it into theater.
Yeah, we have a report and it shows the committee reports.
Right. So instead of, spending time on important subjects like the fact that we're in a deficit or that we need to pass bills and legislation that'll actually help people, this weekend, the end of last week in the Senate, we decided to waste a bunch of time on a resolution. This resolution, giant waste of time because at the end of the day, the resolution does absolutely nothing. It sends a message to the President of the United States and to the House and Senate of the United States. Minnesota government has zero control over what the federal government is doing. The only thing we can do is write our own legislation to protect ourselves from them. But at the end of the day, what the federal government chooses to do, we don't have any say. And so here we are, Senator Latz, throwing up a resolution saying that we are mad and that we completely disagree with the pardoning of January 6th people that were violent, supposedly, allegedly, violent during January 6th. And so then on that, we had a whole bunch of amendments on the floor, which is just more theatrics, more wasting of time. And one of the amendments got on that said basically that violent crimes against law enforcement officers are absolutely not okay. And I voted yes on that. I was there that day. That was on Thursday. I was there. And then it got tabled. And then on Monday, it got brought back up. Well, so people are constantly emailing me and asking me what the heck happened. Why didn't I vote on Monday? Well, it's simple. I wasn't there. I went home. I had issues with my kids and I went home. Why I didn't vote remotely? I don't need to vote remotely on in my opinion, a political theatrics.
Yeah, exactly. It's not even a.
It does
it's not
literally
a bill,
nothing.
Nothing. Yeah.
The fact it's not a bill, it's not going to change anything for the people of Minnesota. The whole purpose of why I was elected, the whole reason I'm there is to help represent the people of Senate District 58 and take care of the people of the people of Minnesota.
Yep.
This bill did nothing, or this resolution did absolutely none of that.
Yeah.
So whether I voted or don't vote does not matter. It did not change anything, and I think it's absolutely ridiculous that anybody would imply that I was taking a position on something.
Yeah, and the reality is I think just there's a lot of people, constituents and voters that just aren't privy to kind of realizing that a lot of they don't realize that a lot of the stuff that happens on the floor is just the
Yeah,
right?
and that's the thing that's most frustrating.
It's a way for both sides of the aisle, and in this case, somebody on the left, to just create a talking point to be able to use to go after Republicans. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't with the resolution, right? They can get you one way or the other, and they just want to be able to try to attack somebody for no reason that had anything to do with the state legislature. And so it's just it's ridiculous. I don't blame you. My views on January 6th are irrelevant, but I think it was a fake.
I think it was a hoax myself.
It was a hoax.
So I'm going to own it. I'm going to own the fact that I absolutely, if I would have been there, probably would have ended up voting no. I think that was such a stupid resolution. There's multiple reasons to vote no. First of all, the stuff that happened on January 6th, the more we get, more information we get, the more we realize that not a lot of what was being spewed on the media was true.
100%.
Second part of the equation is it was a giant waste of our time.
Yeah, you had Trump supporters that were there that were causing chaos. No, you had people that were actors that were wearing the uniform of the Trump supporter that made it look like they were there to support Donald Trump. But as I've stated in the past, two things on January 6th, and I just have to touch on it, is at that time in history, conservatives were protesting a couple of things. One, the election, and two, they were protesting the lockdowns of our state and of our states and our country. And they were sick and tired of the government telling them what they can and cannot do. They were sick and tired of being told that they had to wear masks and they had to social distance. So I know, based on my experience at that time in history, many MAGA supporters and many conservatives were not wearing masks out of defiance of no more. We're not going to do it anymore. Right. So when I look on the all the videos and the footage from that day at January 6th, and every one of these antagonists were wearing masks and covering their face, those were not real, true MAGA Donald Trump conservative supporters.
No, because none of them would have been wearing masks.
Those were actors wearing masks to make it look like cloaking themselves in the conservative movement so that they could create a narrative that Donald Trump was there to create an insurrection. Furthermore, at the time that happened is the time in which the House and the Senate went to their separate chambers to go investigate the delegate votes of Arizona.
Yep.
Okay. And it was upon that specific moment that the insurrection happened. The investigation into the delegates of Arizona were stopped, and members of Congress ran to the basement. They were being protected by security. They were all downstairs, scared for their lives. In the meantime, they were calling family members, you know, in dire desperation, saying, I love you, you know, telling their kids they love them. They're scared for their life. They may not come home. But when they came back to the floor and they came back to session, they all had new speeches.
Oh yeah.
And the consistent language that they used in that speech was insurrection. And I'll
It
tell
was
you
all
what,
prepared.
I had never heard the term insurrection in my life until that day.
Well, talk about theater. You want to talk about
So
theater?
that was
That's
theater, and that was. So you're telling me you were scared for your life, you were in the basement calling your family, but you were rewriting a new speech?
Right.
I call bullshit. Excuse my language.
Which,
but
you know,
it's the truth.
speaking of protests, that gets us to our favorite section of the show, at least my favorite section of the show. It's time for liberal tears.
Hands off.
Hands off Minnesota. Hands off Donald Trump.
Hands off you name it.
Whatever they're coming up with, random hands offness. So, Matty V, let's pull this up. We got some stuff to talk about. So speaking
Hands
of,
off my Social Security.
so while you were at the Capitol, this is a picture that Senator Wiesenberg sent out. This is what we got. It's pretty crazy. This is who was there. They were not supporting Defend the Guard, by the way.
No, they were not.
they were not there for that.
We actually had a couple disruptors that came in and tried to disrupt it, but
Let me adjust something for you real quick here.
yeah, could you?
We're going to take that off of there, I think.
Yeah, there was a lot. I mean, there was probably when I came in, when I parked at the Centennial Building where I had my parking spot. I probably shouldn't disclose that, but whatever.
There you go, guys.
And when I
Sorry
walked
about that.
when I
That's
walked across, I mean, there was thousands of people, and they were busing them in.
Right.
They were getting off
Oh,
of
yeah, off
school
buses,
buses
yeah.
and city
And
buses.
then handing them signs that they had no idea what they meant.
It was crazy. Like that picture right there, you would think that was from, presidential Trump's
Right. But it wasn't.
inauguration in 2020 or January 6th. No, that was the state capitol yesterday.
Right. And, that's
There was
the thing
10,000 people there, easy.
That was the thing that was most frustrating to me is it's like, where are all these people coming from?
Yeah, it was crazy.
So here's a good little clip for us to listen to their rally, their rallying cry.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. You are unbelievable. The sun is shining on you today because you are on the right side of history.
All right.
Has she heard of a bobby pin? How can she see?
The right side of history. What's the right side of history? Is it giving up our rights for globalism? Is that the right side of history? Is it giving all our money away for other countries to spend and squander?
Yeah. I wonder how much money Alex Soros had in his hands in on that. It's funny because just to touch base on that. So earlier in the week in elections committee, we had a representative from the other side of the aisle who brought forth an amendment to one of the bills, and it was to get dark money out of politics. And she specifically brought up Elon Musk and his attempt to buy the election in Wisconsin and how it didn't work, and the voters of Wisconsin pushed back, but we still need to get rid of dark money. Not once bringing up George Soros.
Pritzker or whatever his name is.
Not
those
once,
two billionaires.
Yeah, not once bringing up Alex Soros and how they have funded hundreds, billions of dollars over the last, decades for Democrats to win elections. And I asked a simple question because it's always only Elon Musk. And one of the questions I asked the representative is, we talk about dark money, and that's great. I think it's a conversation we need to have. But as far as dark money, where do you lie on having presidential candidates pay for celebrities to have their endorsement?
Right.
Like Oprah and Beyonce. And she was perplexed. She said she had no idea that was a thing and had never heard of such a thing.
Didn't Oprah get $2 million from Kamala?
That's what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Correct, right? So it's just funny that they only want to point. It's okay when they do it for years, but the second there's a now billionaire
that's
But
involved on the conservative
that's
side.
on the the forefront, that it does the exact same thing. And I believe Trump is smart. I believe
Yeah.
he does these things to bring it to light.
Right.
Not necessarily because it's like the right thing to do, but like, look at this is
This is
what
crazy.
this is what politics has come to.
This is the swamp, for lack of a better term.
Correct.
You know, it's funny because I have that happen to me all the time. Is I get people who've donated or are saying they're going to donate to my campaign, and they say, "Well, if you don't do this, I'm not donating." Okay, then please don't donate. Well, I donated to you. You should do this. You know what I always ask them? What's your address? I'll send you a check.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't waste my time here. This is stupid.
Correct.
You know, you can't buy me, and there are people you can buy though, and I mean, it's pretty obvious that happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's a topic that may come up here in the next show. We have a special show coming. That's why Matt had the funny extra camera, the extra angle.
Yep.
You know, stay tuned, everybody. This show's coming to an end, but we're going to have another show starting up again. So there'll be a second recording going on here yet today, as we talk about grassroots and how important they are.
Absolutely. And you know, we definitely try not to take too many weeks off in between, but you know, we're getting into the nitty gritty at the Capitol, but we are going to be more consistent with our scheduling. So
Yes, absolutely. And I think we stayed consistent. We've gotten it every 2 weeks, but
Yeah,
now
no, absolutely.
we're adding an extra. So this is a bonus week. You guys are going to get 2 shows instead of 1. So thank you, everybody. Remember, if you have any questions, anything you want us to talk about, you want us to know about, and or, you know, ask questions about, MinnesotaLibertyNetwork at gmail.com. That's how you get a hold of us. Otherwise, you can message any of us on Facebook, and then be sure to follow and watch on YouTube and Rumble.
see you later.
Thank you.